The necessity of failure. Let's talk about failure, its relation to success, and its place in modern society. In order to understand the role of failure, you must first understand its meaning as well as its adversaries. Failure, by definition, according to the Oxford Dictionary, means lack of success. The dictionary lists 3 definitions for success, but I want to focus on just 2 for the purpose of this discussion. Success, as listed, means the attainment of prosperity or profit, and a person or thing that achieves desired aims or attains property. I believe these are very minimal definitions that do not reflect the unique meaning to individuals. These minimal definitions have allowed for minimal views, which have carried on throughout history unaltered. As a result of this ever-standing history of society's shortcomings, as well as others' personal anecdotes on their encounters with failure, people's perspectives on the necessity of failure has become clouded. Now, before we get too far in this discussion, it must be acknowledged that while most share a similar stigma on what failure is, regardless of its recorded definition, it means something different from person to person, organization to organization, and place to place. It is something everyone experiences at some point or another in life, but its preconceived effect and valuableness has changed over the years. Scott Dandridge, cultural historian, said in his book, Born Losers, A History of Failure in America, the term failure was commonly used to describe a breaking in business, going broke or bankrupt, and over time, this sort of commercial definition evolved to refer to personal deficiency and a lack of tangible accomplishment or act of proper moral behavior. This is why today, many hear people refer to others as a failure because they didn't measure up to social standards. These standards consist of things like earning a significant income, driving a valuable car, starting a family, and other things. All these things are what some refer to as the American dream. This American dream of freedom and prosperity that is mentioned so often stems from desires of opportunity, an ideal this country was built on and is equated to success, because there were times when the options to make something of yourself and own something were slim to say the least. Additionally, the mindset years ago for different races, cultures, and countries was to succeed or die. And during the constant threat of becoming extinct or being phased and held captive, and it's been ingrained in generation after generation ever since. I believe this is where mankind has picked up the misconception that failure is to be avoided because success is to be obtained, and so both cannot coexist. However, as Scandage implies, failures embody the American fear that our fondest hopes and our worst nightmares may be one and the same. The American dream that equates freedom with success could neither exist nor endure without failure. This brings forth the question, what if failure is just as essential to life as success is? The long-standing battle between the human race and the risk of failing has produced some interesting revelations on the influence it may actually possess. As opposed to history's definition, there is increasing research interest in the antecedents of learning from failure. Wenzhao Wang and his partners from Frontiers in Psychology have conducted studies with results that ultimately suggest employees with higher levels of learning, orientation, or personal encounters with failure tend to show more positive grieving after project failure, which in turn increases their learning from failure because they have learned how to not only accept it, but utilize it as well. Their findings are intended to help enrich the antecedents of learning from failure by shedding light on how and when error learning orientation matters. People are starting to become more aware that there is a trend between failing and succeeding, but many still doubt its necessity. Tim Harford, an economics writer who studies complex systems, speaks in his TED Talk about how he has found a surprising link amongst those who are successful in various situations, their success being built through trial and error. He normalized the idea for his audience by breaking down seemingly day circumstances. For instance, conception, the process of sperm fertilizing an egg, is a matter of hit and miss, which is why we have matters of birth defects and failed pregnancy. Even though it is often overlooked, pregnancy in itself is a success, but many don't realize the accomplishment until they experience failing themselves, i.e. miscarriages and infertility. He mentions more impactful examples such as innovations in healthcare and the progression of third world countries, Although all great accomplishments, they were led by several losses. This further aids the point of how failure is a step in the right direction on a path that ends at success. For with each failed attempt, some new knowledge can be gained. Conversely, people believe that there is only one way to get what they want as fast as they want it. The essential goal for most is to accomplish or obtain something, and a level of greed is often associated with this as if it's human nature to not settle. And as a result, people often have a predetermined course of action already laid out. But much like math, there can be more than one way to get the intended results. Typically, it can be found that people's original course of action entails creating a series of mini goals that ultimately led up to the big one. However, when they don't get it right on the first attempt, it discourages them from continuing to push to the end. Some people even try the easy way out and try to piggyback off of another to achieve their goals. But someone can't learn from solely copying another. What they should really be doing is establishing a systematic process of trial and error, as suggested by many researchers. It is essential to experience failure personally and independently rather than trying to replicate another's success. What works for someone would not always work for another. Not to mention, people interpret failure and success differently. As previously discussed, there is this interpretation of failure in which it is the opposite of success and they can't coexist. Hence the exploratory efforts of businesses to remove possibilities of failure altogether in their operations. Joseph Wascalzo states in his article, A Celebration of Failure, that contemporary American education has taken this interpretation to an extreme, doing whatever it can to eliminate failure. Meaning with the interpretation mentioned earlier, many institutions like schools or any place with students have tried to eliminate the chance of failure altogether by implementing things like gruesome strenuous tutorial-like sessions for tests, tryouts where no one gets cut regardless of talents, and even participation medals in competitions. Although an attempt at removing all possibility of failure could possibly dim the impact of success. Moreover, if we try to permanently remove all possibilities of failure, which removes a learning and persistence building opportunity, how can people maintain the success after if they can't even achieve it? Wascalzo believes we should celebrate failure. In fact, we should exhort our students, trainees, and offspring to be alert to failure and its potential as a learning experience rather than guard against it at all costs. We cannot avoid failure, and if we view it through the constructive lens of self-improvement, not cushion its blow to self-esteem. The only real mistake one can make is the one from which we learn nothing. So if these success-driven courses of action would begin accounting and anticipating the account of failure, there would be a lot more stories of achieved success. Although all this information can be supported, many believe that failure has the opposite effect. An article posted in the University of Chicago News claims that failure can't possibly conjure success because it discourages students and makes them tune out. The article explores how people who are trying to motivate or congratulate others on achieving success like theirs, they often only detail how they first had to fail and make several attempts, but as a result of this, listeners begin to tune out because the detailed telling of hardships relates to some but discourages others. In fact, an experiment was conducted by some of the University of Chicago psychologists, and researchers concluded that it's really a matter of self-esteem. They suggest that failure lowers or damages self-esteem. Rather than noticing how failure could instead be utilized, people begin to indulge in the idea that they themselves are not adequate enough to achieve something great. Several institutions seem to believe and support this idea. People, especially adolescents, are fragile to matters of failure and often push them in the wrong direction instead of inspire them to do more. Studies found that people are more likely to stay on the safe side than take a risk. People have also made the argument that there's a limit to how much you should fail before giving up. They claim that repeated failures need to be followed up with proper reflection and corrective action. Otherwise, those failures generate intolerable risk and waste inside the organization. This is an agreeable point. Failure without correction is not attempting success. There's a saying by Albert Einstein: the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Although some proof and evidence can be found to support some of this side's claims also, there is little found evidence that discouraging and eliminating is beneficial, if even possible. To attempt this could in fact add a new source of stress to someone. Striving for perfection is a challenging task. Some scientists, theologians, and even historians argue to be human is to make mistakes, to fail, but to get up and try again. The important part is what you do with after the failure. After analyzing all the information and possibilities, it's safe to say that failure is an important aspect, if not essential, to acquiring goals. Ultimately, its ability to drive and affect someone's success varies from person to person. However, the one thing no one can argue is that true success comes from learning, and failure is an opportunity to learn. So I think failure should be celebrated because it resembles how someone had the courage to overcome fear and moments of doubt to take a step in the right direction on the path to accomplishing their goals. What makes us unique is how we cope with this particular ambiguous phenomenon. It seems there are quite likely as many coping mechanisms for dealing with failure as there are opportunities to fail. Failure is not permanent.